Konrad Schmidt was a 2005 state champion. In 2004, actually in 2003 at the end of his season, he actually tore a labrum, so he came back as a player, but almost basically morphed into an assistant coach. During that time, labrum surgery was in a high percentage was basically a career ender for both pitchers and catchers. So he came back, couldn't throw, basically watched the game, kind of became like a player coach.
We saw him play quite a bit, when he was younger, and knew a lot about him, and felt that when he reached out to us about transferring, was a no-brainer for us, because he would be the kind of guys. Our program was fortunate to have a lot of really good, successful catchers, he being one of them. And so he fit the mold that we had in our program. So it was just, we felt very fortunate to have Konrad.
That's where I had first known about him, because they did win the state championship, and he was the backbone of that whole year, I believe, for that team. And he was just a pleasure to coach. He was a badass. He was tough. He cared. Great teammate, and I just loved him. He was a tough kid. You'd walk down the back alley with him any day. When
we lost the second game, which means you have to play immediately after that, and then we won the third game, and then came back and had to play San Mateo in about 105-degree heat, and he caught basically both games. Started off that weekend at 225 pounds and literally ended up at about 203 pounds, lost 22 pounds. Going into the state championship, he wasn't basically cleared to even play until he had basically replenished his body. They had IV fluids that he was basically taking. We had IV fluids ready for him. We were down in basically Fresno. The thing that we were real fortunate of is that one, it was cooler in Fresno that next weekend, and number two, we got lucky and we played some night games.
He was very competitive, and like I say, tough, and he cared about his teammates. He wanted to win, and that carried over. And being the catcher, that he played with a lot of energy, and he was the type of guy the other team couldn't stand, but you'd love him if they could have him on their own team, I'm sure they'd take him in a heartbeat. But just a great kid. He came from a great family, and it was a pleasure to coach him.
He was the epitome of a player for us. He leader, tough guy, the kind of players we were looking for. He really kind of epitomized our philosophy, to be honest with you. He knew the game. He played it hard. He held his players accountable, his teammates accountable, and he could, because of the way he played and the way he went about his business every day. He was a pleasure to coach.
Caught every game, never complained, was tough as nails. The thing I think that people don't realize, that year he only led the state in hitting. He was 9 for 10 in drag bunt hits. He basically had skill. He basically had intellect.
As a coach, if you wanted to build a program around a guy that epitomized what your philosophy was, he was the perfect guy.
He just crushed people at the plate when they slide. And I think he caught a guy pretty good from Fresno State, and they called him for illegal block, and he was in the dugout when they called him safe or whatever the play was. And I had to hold him back from attacking the umpire. It was like holding back a 1,000-pound bull charging to the plate.
He handled every bit of the challenge, the toughness, both physically, both mentally. He handled the challenges of what the game threw at him. I mean, for a guy to lose 22 pounds, in basically 3 days off, and obviously we weren't aware of that until after the fact. And then what the guy had to do to get himself basically ready to play back in the state championship, and then came back and hit 500 in the state championship and caught every game and did the same thing.
Well, you made it to the big leagues, which is incredible. And because how tough that is. There's many good players, and especially at that position.
I knew he had what it took. You had to have some toughness, and you had to be able to grind it out on a daily basis, and that was what he was all about. So it would never surprise me at all. Any coach that is successful in this game would tell you that those are the reasons they're successful. You have players like Konrad Schmidt on your team. So you told the story about how many games he caught in the regional and junior college. Well, he's not going to back away from that. So, I mean, that's a Hall of Fame guy right there.
His performance on the field absolutely merits him being a Hall of Famer, but also the story behind the story, or behind the year and behind the statistics, also establishes the fact is that he's a Hall of Famer in every way possible.